Ian Murray.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a great pleasure to follow the member for Filton and Bradley Stoke, and congratulations on his 8 years on the Northern Ireland Select Committee. As we would say on this side of the House, he's done his time down the salt mine. I'm not sure what he's going to go on to do next. Rather perplexed that the government has called this debate in their time. On the second last day before the summer recess, but it's very welcome indeed, and it's very welcome for a number of reasons, to put the positive case for the Union, but also to expose the political games that have been happening in this chamber over the last few months as what they are. And I was astonished, completely astonished. I've got the most respect for my constituency neighbour, the member for Edinburgh East and the SNP spokesperson, for his oratory and the way that he delivers speeches, and he's well known for it locally as well. But completely astonished that the member would stand up in the chamber in 2018 and say that if a vote happened in this House to bring down a Labour government that ushered in 18 years of Conservative government, he would, and I quote, do exactly the same again. It's an astonishing thing for an SNP politician to admit, and I'm happy to give way if he wants to clarify the comment, but we do have it here.
Just to clarify the record, that is not what I said. I said that, in retrospect, had I been there at that time, I would have made the same decision. That is not the same as saying I would vote to do that today.
Yeah, exactly. He also said that the SNP in 1979 withheld consent. They didn't withhold consent, they voted with the Conservative opposition at that time to give the opposition a one-vote majority that brought down the Labour government and ushered in 18 years of Conservative rule. But we are here, as my honourable friend for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath rightly said from the front bench, because we're currently stuck with two nationalist governments, one here in London and one at Holyrood in Edinburgh. And she was also right to quote John Smith. John Smith lived in my constituency in Edinburgh South. I think he was the best Prime Minister this country has never had. And he did say, and I'm quite happy to quote it again and repeat it for the record, that we have two parties sawing away at the legs that support the Union. He said that then, and it's actually more relevant today now than when he said it back then. And let me tell you why we've got two parties sawing away at the legs of the Union. Let me start with the Conservative Party, because I've made the contention today, and I'll make the contention in this House tonight, that the Conservative Party are as big a threat to the Union, whether it be Wales, Ireland or Scotland, than any nationalist party in Wales, Ireland or Scotland. And let me tell you why. They bet the farm on an EU referendum with the arrogance to think that they could win the referendum and lost it, with no plans in place for what would happen beyond that. In 2014, on the steps of Downing Street, the very same person that gambled the farm, the former Prime Minister David Cameron, as the sun was rising over London and all of the votes hadn't even been completed in terms of counting after the independence referendum, decided to declare evil English votes for English laws. A completely unnecessary procedure in this House that has failed miserably. And I agree wholeheartedly with the Honourable Member for Perth and North Perthshire, who's railed against evil for a long number of years, despite having supported it previously. And that kind of thing just goes straight to the heart of why it's undermining the Union. What about the continued unnecessary austerity? A political choice to have austerity as a policy that's central to government that hasn't worked, that's trebled the national debt to nearly £2 trillion, and we still have a deficit that the government promised to wipe by 2015. I'm not even sure they'll wipe it by the projected 22-23. It may be decades beyond that. And the creation of a hostile environment, not just for migrants coming to contribute to this country, but a hostile environment for anybody in this country who happens to be in the unfortunate circumstances of claiming social security as well. And then we have government ministers having to come to this House, being dragged by urgent questions, to explain why they had to cheat on votes in this House to get policies through last week. And I would say, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to get in to the urgent question, and I would have asked the question, what would the government have done in the circumstance last week had the opposition broke a pairing deal with someone who was on maternity leave in government and won that vote? The government would be dragging us all back here as quickly as possible to have that vote again. I'm happy to give way.
Just as a point of information, he maybe wasn't in for the statement, but in fact there have been breaches in pairing arrangements 66 times, 52 of which have been from opposition parties breaking the pair, not the government side of the House.
I wasn't in for the statement, so I can't clarify those figures, but I can say in the 8 years I've been in this House, the opposition have won 3 votes. So breaking of those pairing arrangements has obviously not affected the way that this Parliament operates, and I do think the pairing arrangements are important to maintain. And then we get on to the way that the government has dealt with the Brexit process in terms of devolution. It has not been the finest hour of the Secretary of State, and I'm sure if we could wind the clock back to April, May or June of this year and have those debates again, the government would have dealt with it differently. We had promise after promise after promise at the dispatch box from the Secretary of State, and all of those promises were wiped aside. And indeed, I intervened on the member for Stirling at least 9 times, maybe more. Maybe he can tell us during his contribution, if he could tell us when this was all going to happen, what his objections were and how they were going to resolve those devolution problems. And I'm still waiting to hear the answers, but I'll look forward to him telling us when I intervene on him during his speech later. And then we have a government in chaos. Resignation after resignation after resignation. The Secretary of State in charge of the negotiations to take us out of the European Union, gone. The Foreign Secretary, the worst Foreign Secretary in history, gone. All at a time when we're just a few parliamentary weeks away from having to agree the final EU deal. And then we have a hard Brexit. And everyone goes, well, what's a hard Brexit? What's a soft Brexit? But when you look at what the government are currently doing, we are hurtling towards a no-deal Brexit. And let me tell you why. Because the government have cobbled together after 2 years, what they now affectionately call the Chequers Agreement. They undermined the very same Chequers Agreement in this House by accepting amendments to the Trade and Customs Bill the following week, which has driven a horse and coaches, or a course and hotches, if you've been drinking the same whisky as the Minister in opening this debate, right through that agreement. And not only does it undermine the agreement, but it's an agreement in its original form that the EU have already ruled out. So we are heading for a hard Brexit and a no-deal Brexit. And you can see that all that's happening in government at the moment are people are trying to fight over the keys to number 10 rather than fight for what's in the interests of this country. Then let's get to Northern Ireland. Everyone in this House, to a person, will absolutely agree that there should be no border between Ireland, Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. We all agree on that. But the government have set their own red lines in the Brexit process that makes that completely and utterly unachievable. So their own red lines are stopping them from achieving that, so it's undermining the very fabric of the United Kingdom. And I keep asking ministers this question and can't get an answer. And it'd be interesting to get the answer from the Scottish Conservative MPs this evening. If the government can argue, with the red lines that they've set, that they will no longer require any kind of border equipment on the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, if the UK and the Republic of Ireland are in 2 different trade and customs arrangements, how they could possibly argue, in the event of another independence referendum, that you would require a border between Scotland and England. I'm happy to give way.
I'm never for giving way because he's repeating this oft-repeated myth about the border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. I don't know if you noticed this week that the EU negotiators have promised the Irish government, Junckers and Barnier, that in the event of no deal, there still would not have to be any kind of checks on the Northern Ireland border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. So if you can have no checks with no deal, you can have no checks with any sort of a deal at all.
It's an extraordinary comment, and we'll see what happens come the 29th of March 2019 or after the transition period. And I just don't think you can possibly achieve what you want to achieve with the government's current negotiated position. And lastly, Madam Deputy Speaker, you have the Scottish Conservative leader Ruth Davidson in 2017 snap general election promising that if you sent Scottish Conservative MPs to Westminster, they would stand against the Prime Minister's hard Brexit and deliver what would be in the best possible interest of Scotland. Well, maybe if she didn't say that, you can tell us what they want. Ruth Davidson stands up day after day, week after week, railing against her own government here at Westminster, but the 13 Scottish Conservative MPs loyally traipse down the lobby, putting through the hard Brexit and everything that's upsetting for Scotland. I've already given away, and I'm sorry, one opportunity wins one opportunity, so I've given away 2 months before. And Madam Deputy Speaker, last week, every single vote in this House on Monday and Tuesday on the Customs Bill and the Trade Bill were passed in this House with fewer of a majority than there are Scottish Conservative MPs. If they did what they promised to do, we'd be in a much better position. So that's why they're undermining the Union. And very quickly, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me go on to why the SNP undermine the union. Because they don't want the union, do they? They want independence for Scotland. But what the proposals that they're putting forward in terms of independence for Scotland are now in this Growth Commission report that they've given us. The Growth Commission report has been fundamentally torn apart by anyone who's ever read it who doesn't want independence for Scotland. The member for North East Somerset this morning talked about a no-deal Brexit potentially being 50 years of austerity in terms of the UK, and the Growth Commission report is promising 25 years of austerity in terms of the report. And if the model had been applied that's in the Growth report, I can't, I'm afraid, because I need to wrap up, but if the model in the Growth Commission report had been applied over the last decade, Scotland would have had £60 billion less to spend on public services than has actually been the case. So the SNP are proposing something that is austerity max from the government. I can't, because Madam Deputy Speaker wants me to wrap. No, I wouldn't upset Madam Deputy Speaker if I were you. It's not a good thing. I'm happy to upset you. I'm not going to upset Madam Deputy Speaker. And just to wrap up with 2 points. All the analysis that's been done of the Scottish NHS, and this is why the SNP are just as big a threat to the union as the Conservatives, have shown that even under a Conservative government who have been putting less and less into the NHS than previous Labour governments, those Barnett consequentials have not been passed to the Scottish NHS through the Scottish Government, to the tune of anything between £340 million and £750 million, depending on which measure you use. So let me conclude with a few issues about how you can keep the union strengthened and together. A soft Brexit would be one. A GMC that's much more transparent and works. As the member for Stirling said in his Westminster Hall debate, departments re-tagged to see whether or not they're English departments or UK departments. A federal constitution that not only deals with Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, but deals with England as well, and England being too large and people like the North East and the North West of England feeling as if they're not represented as best as they could. Stop both governments fighting over the constitution and celebrate and develop devolution. Because I'll finish with what Nye Bevan said, and I'll plagiarise Nye Bevan. He said of the NHS that the NHS will survive while there are people in politics worth fighting for it. Well, the UK will only survive if there's people that are willing to fight for it, and Scottish Labour always will.